The plane tore open at 22,000 feet over the Pacific Ocean. 189 people were going to die. Then Seat 11B slowly stood up. She was not a pilot. Not a hero. Just a passenger with a replaced knee and 30 years of knowing exactly what broken metal looks like. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. It was a Tuesday morning. August 29, 2023. Pacific Airways Flight 774 pushed back from the gate at Sydney International Airport at exactly 6:15 a.m. The sky outside was clear. The air was cold and quiet in the way that early mornings at airports always are. The ground crew moved efficiently below. The terminal lights were still bright against the pale sky. There was nothing remarkable about any of it. The aircraft was a Boeing 737-800. It carried 189 passengers and 6 crew members. The destination was Honolulu Daniel K. Inouye International Airport. The flight time was approximately 9 hours. Between Sydney and Honolulu there was nothing but ocean. The Tasman Sea first, and then the open Pacific after that. 9 hours of deep water beneath the aircraft. 9 hours of blue and nothing else. The passengers settled into their seats with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this before. Bags went into overhead bins. Laptops came out. Headphones went on. Blankets were unfolded. The particular rhythm of a long overwater flight established itself quickly. There was nothing to see outside except blue. There was nothing to do except wait. Most people accepted this easily. They read. They slept. They watched movies on the small screens in front of them. They ate when the meals came. They looked at their watches. They waited for the other side. Captain Felix Drummond sat in the left seat of the cockpit. He was 50 years old. Australian. He had been flying commercial aircraft for 26 years. He had 17,400 hours of flight time. He had flown this route many times before. He knew the Pacific well. He knew its moods and its particular emptiness and the way the ocean looked at different altitudes in different light. First Officer Yuki Tanaka sat in the right seat. She was 34 years old. Japanese-Australian. She had 5,200 hours. She was precise and focused and very good at her job. They worked together smoothly. The takeoff was normal. The climb was normal. The first 2 hours of the flight were normal. Nothing was remarkable about any of it. In row 11, seat A, a man named Gerald Okafor sat looking out the window. He was 67 years old. Retired civil engineer. He had worked for 40 years with structural materials. Bridges. Buildings. Foundations. The kind of work that required patience and precision and a deep understanding of how materials behaved under stress. He had retired 8 months ago and he was still not entirely used to it. He had been in Sydney visiting his daughter and her family for 3 weeks. Now he was going home to Auckland. He was thinking about his house. About the garden. About whether he had remembered to water the plants before he left. The window beside him showed nothing but blue. Flat blue. The particular blue of very deep water. The ocean at this altitude had no visible bottom, no texture, no reference point. It was just blue. Endless blue. Gerald had been looking at it for 40 minutes. He was not sure what he was looking at. He was not sure why he kept looking. There was simply nothing else to see. In seat 11B, beside him, a woman sat reading. Her name was Nadia Osei. She was 52 years old. Ghanaian British. She wore reading glasses pushed up on her head, grey braids pinned loosely behind her ears, a soft burgundy cardigan over a plain white shirt, dark trousers, simple flat shoes. She looked like someone who worked in a university library. Or perhaps a school administrator. Someone whose job involved quiet rooms and careful attention and the slow, methodical management of things that mattered. She had been reading since before takeoff. She was not reading a novel. She was reading a technical journal. Fatigue and Fracture of Engineering Materials and Structures, Volume 46. It lay open on her tray table. Her reading glasses were down on her nose. She made occasional small notes in the margin with a mechanical pencil. Precise little marks. Gerald had glanced at the journal during boarding and decided not to ask about it. People on long flights generally preferred to be left alone. He was happy to be left alone himself. They had exchanged nothing beyond the minimal acknowledgments of strangers sharing adjacent space for 9 hours. In seat 11C, on the aisle, a young man sat with his earphones in. He was 24. He was completely absent from everything around him. He had been that way since boarding and showed no signs of changing. The three of them had said nothing to each other. This was fine. This was how long flights worked. At 8:47 a.m., the aircraft was at 22,000 feet over the Pacific Ocean. The Tasman Sea was behind them. Midway Atoll was 340 nautical miles ahead. The passengers had been airborne for 2 hours and 32 minutes. The cabin was quiet in the specific way of a morning flight where most people have settled into their routines. Some were sleeping. Some were watching movies. The meal service had ended. The flight attendants were moving through the cabin slowly, collecting cups and wrappers. Nadia looked up from her journal. She did not look at Gerald. She did not look at the young man beside her. She looked at the window. She took her reading glasses from her head and put them on properly. She looked at the wing outside. Then she looked at the fuselage wall beside Gerald's window. Then back at the wing. Her expression did not change. But something shifted behind her eyes. A focusing. A sharpening. The look of someone who has seen something that requires all of their attention. She reached into the bag at her feet and took out a plain spiral-bound notebook. It was already half full with handwriting. She opened it to a fresh page. She picked up her mechanical pencil. She wrote one word. Propagation. She underlined it twice. Gerald glanced at the page. He was a civil engineer. He had spent 40 years working with structural materials. He did not know precisely what propagation meant in the context of whatever she was thinking, but he knew what the word meant in general terms. He knew what propagation of a crack meant. He knew what it meant when a structural engineer wrote that word and underlined it twice. He looked at the fuselage wall beside his window. At the place where the wall met the window frame. There was a line there. A very thin line. He had not noticed it before. He looked at it more carefully. He was not an aerospace engineer. He could not read aircraft skin the way someone trained specifically in that field could. But he had worked with structural materials for 40 years. He knew what a hairline looked like. He knew what a hairline meant. He looked at Nadia. She was looking at the wing. Her face was completely still. It was the stillness of someone doing something very specific with all of their concentration. Not the stillness of shock or fear. The stillness of a professional examining something that required professional examination. Her pencil was in her hand. Her notebook was open on her tray table. Gerald did not say anything. He looked back at the window. At the hairline. He looked at the ocean far below. He looked at the blue. He ordered a whiskey from the flight attendant who passed. It came. He did not touch it. Nadia was still reading the wing. At 8:51 a.m., the sound came. It was not the sound most people expected. There was no explosion. There was no bang. There was a crack. Sharp and clean, like a large branch breaking. And then immediately after the crack, a rush of air. And then the specific, unmistakable horror of cabin decompression. A fog appeared instantly in the cabin as the pressure equalized. The oxygen masks dropped from the panels above every seat. They swung on their thin tubes. The screaming started. Then, as masks went on and people began to breathe, the screaming became muffled. It became collective. The sound of 189 people understanding simultaneously that something had broken. That something was wrong in a way that could not be undone by a calm announcement from the cockpit. A panel had separated from the upper left fuselage in the row 8 area. It was approximately 4 feet by 3 feet. It was gone. The hole where it had been showed blue sky. Just blue sky. The wind through the hole was significant but not immediately violent. The decompression was complete and immediate. Oxygen masks hung from every panel. The fog was thinning. In the cockpit, Captain Drummond had his mask on in 4 seconds. First Officer Tanaka had hers on in 3. The warnings were simultaneous and overwhelming. Every alarm that could sound was sounding. Drummond initiated emergency descent immediately. Standard procedure. Get the aircraft below 10,000 feet where passengers could breathe without masks. Get it down fast and get it stable. But Drummond was already running the second calculation at the same time. Structural failure. Unknown extent. The aircraft was descending and responding to his inputs. That was good. But he did not know what the panel separation had done to the structure around it. He did not know if the wing spars were compromised. He did not know if a bank angle of 20 degrees would hold or would trigger a second failure. He did not know because he could not see the outside of his aircraft from the cockpit. He was flying on instruments and feel. On experience. On 17,400 hours of knowing how an aircraft was supposed to behave. He did not know if this aircraft was still capable of behaving the way it was supposed to. Midway Island was 340 nautical miles away. That was the nearest airport. That was where they were going. In seat 11B, Nadia had her mask on before the panel separated. She had her mask on because she had been watching the hairline for 4 minutes. She had been watching the stress pattern in the fuselage skin. She had been reading it the way she had read damaged and failing metal for 30 years. She had not known exactly when it was going to go. She had not known exactly where. But she had known it was going to go. She had known with the specific certainty of someone who has seen the early stages of this kind of failure many times before. Who knows what propagation looks like and where it leads. She had not said anything because the correct protocol was not to alarm passengers based on a visual assessment. The correct protocol was to notify the flight crew through proper channels and let them assess. She had been composing the note to pass to the flight attendant. She had been 3 words in when the panel separated. After the masks dropped, she sat for 2 seconds. The fog was clearing. The wind from the hole was audible from her row. Gerald was frozen beside her, mask on, eyes wide, staring at the hole in the fuselage 5 rows ahead. The young man in 11C was gripping his armrests with both hands. Nadia looked at the wing. In the first seconds after a structural failure, if you knew what to look for, you could read the secondary stress distribution. The way the skin moved. The way the rivets around the separation point were bearing load. The geometry of the failure edge. She knew what to look for. She had 30 years of knowing exactly what to look for. She had spent 30 years reading failed metal the way other people read text. She looked at the wing for 8 seconds. Then she looked at the spar attachment point visible through Gerald's window at the specific angle her seat allowed. She looked at it carefully. Precisely. The way she looked at everything that required precision. She took her notebook. She wrote 1 sentence. She wrote it in large, clear letters. Large enough to be read at arm's length. Large enough for someone who needed to act on it immediately. She tore the page out. Folded it once. She looked down the aisle. The flight attendant nearest to her was Amara Diallo. 28 years old. French Senegalese. 3 years with Pacific Airways. She was at row 4, managing passengers, moving efficiently despite the chaos around her. Her mask was on. Her hands were steady. Nadia looked at her left knee. She had a total knee replacement 8 months ago. The surgery had gone well. The recovery was going well. But her knee could not rush. Her knee could not run. Her knee moved at one speed, and that speed was deliberate and careful, and it was not the speed that the situation seemed to demand. But she could move. She could move steadily, one hand on each headrest, one row at a time. She could get to row 4. It would take time. She stood up. Slowly. Gerald watched her stand. He watched this woman in a cardigan stand up from seat 11B in a decompressed aircraft over the Pacific Ocean. This woman who had been reading a technical journal about material fatigue since before takeoff. This woman who had been looking at the fuselage wall while Gerald was thinking about his plans. This woman who had written one word in her notebook and underlined it twice. She stepped into the aisle. One hand on row 11A headrest. She steadied herself. She moved. One hand on row 10C headrest. She steadied. She moved. One hand on row 9C headrest. She steadied. She moved. Each row. Each headrest. Steady. Deliberate. Not rushing. Not pausing unnecessarily. Moving at exactly the speed her body allowed. The wind from the hole in the fuselage was audible. The masked passengers on either side of the aisle watched her. Some were confused. Some were still panicking. Some were clutching their armrests and staring straight ahead. A few watched her the way Gerald was watching her. With a specific quality of attention that was not quite understanding but was something close to it. Gerald watched her reach row 8. She passed the hole in the fuselage. She glanced at it as she passed. One professional glance. Quick and precise and completely without emotion. She looked at the failure edge. She looked at the geometry of the separated panel and the skin around it. She read it. Then she looked forward again and kept moving. Row 7. One hand on the headrest. Steady. Move. Row 6. One hand on the headrest. Steady. Move. Row 5. One hand on the headrest. Steady. Move. Amara saw her coming at row 5. Amara moved toward her immediately. She raised her hand. "Ma'am, I need you to return to your seat." Nadia held out the folded note. Amara took it. She read it. She read it once and then read it again. The note said, "Structural engineer. 30 years fuselage fatigue analysis. Panel separation row 8. Wing spar status visible from 11B. Critical information for captain. Do not bank more than 15 degrees until I speak to him. Please." Amara looked up from the note. She looked at Nadia. At the cardigan. At the knee she was clearly protecting. At the journal still tucked under her arm. At her face. Which was calm. Not the calm of someone in shock. Not the calm of someone who did not understand what was happening. The calm of someone who understood exactly what was happening and knew precisely what the next step was. Amara picked up the forward interphone. The interphone was down. The decompression had damaged the line. She knocked on the cockpit door. Drummond opened it. The aircraft was descending through 18,000 feet. It was responding to his inputs. The emergency had been declared. Midway Island was on the navigation display. He looked at Amara. He looked at the woman beside her. 52 years old. Cardigan. Reading glasses. One hand on the galley counter for support. Amara held out the note. He read it. He read it again. Structural engineer, he said. 30 years, Nadia said. Fuselage fatigue. Metal failure analysis. I have investigated 11 major structural failures. I was watching the stress propagation pattern in your fuselage skin before the panel separated. I need to look at the wing from your cockpit window. I need to confirm spar integrity. Right now, while we still have the altitude to adjust the flight profile if necessary. Drummond looked at First Officer Tanaka. Tanaka looked at Nadia. At the journal under her arm. At the note in Drummond's hand. At her face. What specifically do you need to see? Tanaka said. Left wing spar attachment point. Visible from the left side of the cockpit at approximately this heading. I need 30 seconds. And if the spar is compromised? Then you need to know immediately. And I need to tell you the exact bank angle limit before secondary failure becomes likely. And if it's not compromised? Then you fly to midway normally and I go back to my seat. Drummond made the decision. Come in, he said. She stood at the left side of the cockpit. Both hands were free now. She held the back of the captain's seat with one hand for balance and held her notebook in the other. She looked at the wing. Drummond and Tanaka did not look at the wing. They looked at her face. Because her face would tell them what the wing was telling her. They watched her eyes move. Precise and methodical. Not darting. Not searching. Moving the way eyes move when they know exactly what they are looking for and are finding it systematically. She looked at the spar attachment point. She looked at the skin displacement pattern adjacent to the failure. She looked at the rivet lines forward and aft of the separation. She looked at the geometry of everything. Her left hand was still on the back of the captain's seat. Her right hand held the notebook. Her face was completely still. Reading. The way she had read structural failures for 30 years. The way she had read the fuselage skin at row 8 from her seat before the panel went. The way she read every piece of failed metal she had ever examined. Drummond counted. He was not sure why he counted. He counted anyway. She looked at the wing for 19 seconds. At 19 seconds she exhaled. Once. Controlled. She turned to Drummond. Your spar is intact, she said. The panel separation did not reach the spar attachment. The skin stress lines forward of the failure are within, just within, the secondary propagation threshold. The next failure point is at approximately 22 degrees of bank angle. Below 15 degrees you are safe. Below 12 you have a comfortable margin. Certain. Drummond said. She looked at the wing one more time. This was not the look of someone confirming what they had already decided. This was a second look. A genuine re-examination. A genuine willingness to be wrong. She looked at the wing the way she had looked at every structural assessment that mattered, which was with the understanding that certainty was earned through honest examination and not through confidence alone. Yes, she said. Why 15 degrees specifically? The stress concentration at the forward rivet line of the failure. The skin has displaced approximately 2.3 mm at the failure edge based on visual estimation. At 15 degrees of bank the load distribution increases by approximately 18% at that point. At 22 degrees it reaches the propagation threshold for the skin thickness on this variant. You can estimate skin displacement from a visual. I have done this for 30 years, she said. Yes. Tanaka was looking at her. Midway is at 330 nautical miles. Current heading 270. We will need a 12-degree right turn to intercept the direct track. 12 degrees is within safe margin, Nadia said. Make the turn slowly. 5 degrees per second. Let the load redistribute gradually. Drummond looked at the navigation display. He looked at Midway Island. He looked at the heading indicator. He looked at the woman in the cardigan who had walked 8 rows on a replaced knee to hand someone a note. Who had stood in this cockpit and looked at his wing for 19 seconds? Who had told him a number, 15 degrees, and then told him exactly why? Slowly, he said to Tanaka. 5 degrees per second. Tanaka began the turn. Nadia watched the wing. The turn reached 12 degrees and held. The wing held. The spar attachment point was unchanged from what she had read. She watched it carefully through the entire turn. She watched every degree of it. Stable, she said. The turn is within parameters. Drummond looked at her. Thank you. There is something else, she said. What? The descent. You have leveled at 10,000 feet. At this altitude and this airspeed, the aerodynamic load on the compromised skin section is approximately 340 kilopascals. If you increase airspeed above 280 knots, that load increases to the secondary propagation threshold. Stay below 280. Drummond checked his airspeed. He was at 276 knots. He reduced slightly. 270 knots. Good, she said. Is there anything else I need to know? She looked at the wing for a long moment. Not that I can see from here. But I cannot see the aft attachment point from this angle. If there is any change in aircraft handling, any asymmetric tendency, any control input that feels different from what you expect, tell me. I will need to reassess. You will stay up here, Drummond said. It was not a question. If you need me, she said. Yes. She stood at the left cockpit window and watched the wing. For 340 nautical miles. What followed was 2 hours and 23 minutes of the most controlled, careful flying Drummond had done in 26 years. Not the dramatic kind of flying. Not the kind that looked remarkable from outside. The sustained, precise kind. The kind where every single input was measured and considered before it was made. The kind where the skill was entirely in what you chose not to do. Nadia stood at the cockpit window. Occasionally she sat on the jump seat that Tanaka offered her. She watched the wing without stopping. She called out any change she saw. There were 2 changes. At 220 miles out, the aircraft passed through a region of light turbulence. In the turbulence, the skin displacement at the forward rivet line of the failure increased by approximately 0.5 millimeters. Reduce airspeed 10 knots, she said immediately. The displacement increased slightly in that turbulence. Precautionary. Drummond reduced. The displacement stabilized. The turbulence passed. She watched the wing return to its previous state. She confirmed it. She said nothing more about that. At 80 miles out, a change in wind required a 7-degree heading adjustment. Before Drummond could ask, she cleared it. 7 degrees is within safe parameters. Make it the same way as before. Slowly. He made the turn. The wing held. Otherwise there were no changes. The aircraft flew steadily at 270 knots. Below 12 degrees of bank. At 10,000 feet. In a straight and careful line toward a small island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Tanaka managed communications with Midway. She arranged for emergency services. She coordinated the logistics of landing a structurally compromised 737 on a remote Pacific Island airstrip with foam trucks and medical vehicles standing by. She managed all of it without raising her voice. She managed all of it with complete professionalism. Drummond flew. Nadia watched the wing and called the margins. In the passenger cabin, the 189 people on the aircraft did not know precisely what was happening in the cockpit. They knew there had been a structural failure. They knew the aircraft had descended rapidly. They knew they were no longer heading to Honolulu. The flight attendants moved through the cabin calmly, answering questions, providing reassurance, managing the fear that was present in every row. The masks were still hanging. The hole in the fuselage at row 8 was still there. The passengers in the rows near it had been moved. The area around the hole was roped off with the galley service carts. Gerald sat in row 11 and watched the empty seat beside him. He thought about the 8 rows. He thought about each headrest. He thought about what she had been carrying when she walked forward. Not the journal. Not the notebook. The weight of what she had seen and what she knew and what she needed to do with it. He thought about the word she had written in her notebook before the panel separated. One word. Underlined twice. And what it meant that she had already known. He did not touch his whiskey. Henderson Field on Midway Atoll had 2,440 meters of runway. It was a former naval air station. Foam trucks were staged at the runway edges. Medical vehicles were positioned and waiting. Every available resource the island had was ready. The approach was long and flat. Drummond brought the aircraft in with extreme care. Every degree of bank was considered before it was made. Every change in airspeed was thought through. He flew the approach the way a surgeon performs an operation in which there is no room for error and no second attempt. At 500 feet, Nadia was still at the cockpit window. Spar attachment unchanged, she said. Skin displacement stable. You are clear to land. Drummond did not acknowledge it. He was flying. The runway was ahead. His hands were on the controls and his eyes were on the approach. He did not need to acknowledge it. She had said what needed to be said. That was enough. The wheels touched down at 11:43 a.m. Smooth. Centered. The aircraft rolled down the runway at Henderson Field on Midway Atoll and came to a stop. 189 passengers. 6 crew. On the ground. The wing still attached. The spar, as she had read it from a cockpit window at altitude, from a replaced knee, after walking 8 rows of a decompressed aircraft, intact. The engines went off. The specific silence of an aircraft that had arrived somewhere it needed to arrive settled over the cockpit. Drummond sat with both hands still on the controls. He sat like that for a moment. Then he turned around. Nadia was still looking at the wing. It's done, he said quietly. She looked at him. She nodded. The spar will need full inspection before this aircraft flies again, she said. Even with no visible compromise there may be microfracturing at the attachment points from the load cycling during the flight. It should be treated as a full structural event. I will make sure, he said. She nodded. She stood up from the jump seat. Her left knee was stiff from 2 hours and 23 minutes in that position. She moved carefully. She picked up her journal. Her notebook. Her mechanical pencil. She looked at Drummond. At Tanaka. At the Pacific outside the cockpit window. Blue. Flat. The same endless blue it had always been. Good landing, she said. She went back to her seat. Gerald was exactly where she had left him. His mask was off. The emergency descent was complete. The aircraft was on the ground. He looked at her when she sat down. He looked at her knee as she eased it carefully into position. He looked at the journal she set back on her tray table. He looked at the mechanical pencil in her hand. She opened the journal. She found her page. The pencil was in her hand. Then she stopped. She did not write. She just sat. The pencil rested in her fingers and she looked at the tray table and she said nothing. Gerald said nothing for a long time. He looked at the whiskey in its plastic cup. Still full. Still untouched. He looked at the hole in the fuselage 5 rows ahead. He could see the sky through it. Still blue. Still endless. Then he said, "You saw it coming." She looked at him. "Before it happened," he said. "You were looking at the fuselage wall. You wrote something down. You knew." She was quiet for a moment. "I had a reasonable assessment," she said. "Based on what I could see. And you didn't say anything. She looked at the tray table. I was composing what to write for the flight attendant when the panel separated. 3 words in, she said. I had written 3 words. Gerald looked at the ocean. At the blue. What were the 3 words? She looked at the pencil in her hand. Fatigue crack propagation. She paused. I was going to write, fatigue crack propagation visible in fuselage skin section row 8, recommend immediate inspection, signed Dr. Nadia Osei, AAIB, retired. That was the note I was writing. I had written 3 words when the panel went. But you didn't finish it, he said. No. He looked at her. Would it have made a difference? If you had sent the note before? She thought about it. She did not answer quickly. She thought about it the way she thought about everything that mattered, which was honestly and without trying to arrive at the answer that felt best. I don't know, she said. If the flight attendant had reached the cockpit in time. If the captain had decided to divert before the panel separated. Possibly. Possibly not. The crack was already at failure threshold. It may have gone regardless. But possibly, he said. Possibly, she said. She looked at the journal. At the word she had written before the panel separated. Propagation. Underlined twice. The single word that had preceded everything. The word that she had known was the beginning of what followed. I have been wrong twice in 30 years, she said. Once I said something was fine. It was not. A panel separation. Nobody died. But I was wrong. Today you were right, Gerald said. Today I was right. The spar was intact. My reading was correct. 189 people are on the ground. And? She looked at him. And I am still thinking about the 3 words I did not finish writing. He understood. He had spent 40 years with structural materials. He understood what it meant to carry the weight of the assessment you almost made but did not. The note you were 3 words into. The inspection recommendation that was composing itself in your mind when the thing you were recommending an inspection of had already decided not to wait. He picked up his whiskey. Looked at it. Put it back down. For what it's worth, he said, I watched you walking forward. One headrest at a time. I didn't know what you were going to say or what you knew or why it mattered. I didn't know anything except that you were walking forward and you were doing it at the only speed available to you. And I thought, that woman is doing the most important thing she has ever done. Slowly. Because that is the speed she has. And she is doing it anyway. Nadia looked at him. At this retired civil engineer who had ordered a whiskey and not touched it and had watched her cross 8 rows on a replaced knee. She did not say anything. But she picked up her pencil. She turned to page 34 of the journal, where the technical notation she had made before takeoff was still visible. She wrote 3 words in the margin. Not the 3 words she had started before. Different words. Still walking forward. She closed the journal. Outside the window, Midway Atoll was small and green and flat against the Pacific. The ocean surrounded it entirely. The same ocean. The same endless blue. Completely indifferent to the 189 people alive on its small patch of land because a woman in a cardigan had walked forward slowly and looked at a wing for 19 seconds and read what it was telling her. The Australian Transport Safety Bureau opened a full investigation within 48 hours. Investigators arrived on Midway. They examined the aircraft. They documented the failure. They photographed the separation point and the surrounding structure. They measured and recorded and preserved everything for the formal investigation that would follow. Nadia gave a formal statement. It was 42 pages long. Technical. Precise. With sketches. She drew the failure geometry from memory with the accuracy of someone who had been looking at it professionally since the moment it happened. She described the fatigue crack propagation pattern. She described the stress lines she had observed in the fuselage skin before the panel separated. She described what she had seen from the cockpit window and how she had read it and what conclusions she had drawn from it and why. The investigation established that the failure had originated at a rivet hole. A fatigue crack. Standard fatigue mechanism. The crack had been developing for an estimated 200 to 300 flight cycles. It had started small, as all fatigue cracks start small, and it had grown in the way that fatigue cracks grow when the conditions are right and the inspection intervals are long enough. The relevant section of the fuselage had been inspected 14 months earlier. The inspector had signed off. The crack had been below the visual detection threshold at the time of that inspection. Below what could be seen. And then it had grown. And grown. Until it was not below any threshold at all. The ATSB investigation recommended revised inspection intervals for this fuselage section on the Boeing 737-800. The recommendation was adopted by CASA, the Australian Civil Aviation Safety Authority, within 6 months. Every 737-800 in the Pacific Airways fleet underwent accelerated structural inspection within 3 weeks of the incident. 2 aircraft were found with similar fatigue cracks in early stages. Both were grounded. Both were repaired. Neither had reached the failure threshold. Neither had come close to what happened on Flight 774. They had been caught. They had been caught because of what happened on Flight 774. Because of the investigation it triggered and the recommendations it produced and the inspections those recommendations required. They had been caught because a woman in a cardigan had walked forward one headrest at a time. Drummond gave one statement to the investigation. He was precise and thorough. The investigator asked him several questions about the flight. At the end, the investigator asked, "What would you want people to know about the passenger who assisted?" He was quiet for a long moment. "She walked 8 rows on a knee replacement to hand someone a note," he said. "That note reached me. The note told me to get her. I got her. She looked at the wing for 19 seconds and told me the spar was intact and told me to stay below 15 degrees of bank and 280 knots. And those parameters, were they correct? The investigation will confirm them formally. From where I was, flying the aircraft, they were exactly correct. Every time I had a question about whether a particular input was within safe limits I looked at her. She would either nod or say something specific. Every time she said something specific it was correct. How do you know she was correct and not simply very confident?" Drummond looked at the investigator. "Because I have been flying for 26 years, he said. I know the difference between someone who knows something and someone who sounds like they know something. She knew. How? The way she looked at the wing, he said. She was not looking at it hopefully. She was not looking at it nervously. She was reading it. Like text. Like it was information she was receiving and processing. I have never seen anyone look at a piece of aircraft structure the way she looked at my wing." He paused. "She also told me immediately what the limits were and why. Not just the number. The reason. The specific load distribution at the specific rivet line. That is not improvisation. That is 30 years of understanding the physics of metal failure." "One more question," the investigator said. "She told you she had been wrong twice in 30 years. Did that concern you?" Drummond thought about it. "No," he said. "It reassured me. Someone who has never been wrong has not been tested. Someone who has been wrong twice in 30 years and can tell you exactly when and exactly why, that is someone who learns. That is someone who has spent 30 years getting more right. Not less." Nadia did not give interviews. She had no interest in interviews. She submitted her technical statement, answered the investigation's questions, provided her sketches and her calculations, and then she went back to London. Back to her consultancy. Back to her work. She added one item to her standard procedure before flights. She had always carried her notebook. She had always carried her mechanical pencil. She began carrying a second pen. Not because she expected to need it. Not because she was certain something like this would happen again. But because the 3 words she had not finished writing, fatigue crack propagation, had been 3 words into a sentence she was composing on a mechanical pencil when the panel separated. And the time between observation and written note was time during which the pencil might fail or be dropped or be inadequate in some way. The second pen was for that moment. The moment between seeing something and writing it down. The moment that should never be longer than it had to be. She was not dramatic about this. She went to a stationery shop in Kensington on a Thursday afternoon and bought a pen. A plain pen. She put it in her bag. She went back to work. Gerald reached Auckland 2 days later on a replacement flight. His plants had survived. The house was as he had left it. The garden was fine. He did not tell his wife immediately. He sat in his kitchen and drank tea and looked out at the garden. The garden was ordinary and green and familiar. The kettle was the same. The mugs were the same. Everything was exactly as it had always been. Then he told her. Everything. The panel separating. The fog. The masks. The whole showing blue sky. The woman in the cardigan. The 8 rows. One headrest at a time. His wife listened without interrupting. When he finished she said, "What was she like?" Gerald thought about it carefully. He thought about the word propagation written and underlined in a notebook. He thought about the stillness of her face when she was reading the wing. He thought about the second look she had taken before she said yes. He thought about the 3 words she had not finished writing. She looked at that hole in the fuselage when she walked past it, he said. Like it was something she needed to read. Not something she needed to fear. Just information. And then she kept walking. His wife looked at him. That is what she was like, he said. Someone for whom what she knew mattered more than what she felt. And who kept walking at exactly the speed she could walk. He drank his tea. I have been an engineer for 40 years, he said. I thought I understood structural integrity. He looked out at the garden. She showed me something else about it. The note that Nadia had written, torn from her notebook, folded once, handed to Amara Diallo in the aisle of a decompressed aircraft, was entered into evidence in the ATSB investigation. It was marked Exhibit 7. The investigation report referenced it in Section 4.3, which was titled Passenger Assistance. The language of the report was formal and precise. It read, "A passenger with specialist expertise in structural fatigue analysis provided critical information to the flight crew regarding wing spar integrity following the panel separation event. This information directly informed the crew's decision regarding safe bank angle limits and approach airspeed for the diversion to Midway Atoll. The passenger's assessment was confirmed as accurate by post-landing structural inspection." That was the official language. It was accurate. It captured what happened in the way that official language captures things. Correctly and completely and without the weight of what it felt like. It did not capture the specific weight of a 52-year-old woman standing up slowly in a decompressed aircraft over the Pacific Ocean. Moving forward one headrest at a time. At exactly the speed her body allowed. Carrying what she knew toward the people who needed it. It did not capture the 19 seconds of looking at a wing. The one exhale. The second look before the certain answer. It did not capture Gerald watching her from row 11, not understanding what she was going to do but understanding somehow that it mattered. Official language rarely captures those things. After the investigation concluded, the note was returned to Nadia. She did not frame it. She did not display it. She put it in the front pocket of the same bag she carried on every flight. The pocket where she kept the things she needed to reach without thinking. The pocket where she now kept the second pen. Where she kept the things she needed to reach without thinking. The next flight. The next observation. The journal in her lap and the pen in her hand and the window beside her and whatever it showed. Whatever needed to be read and written down and carried forward to the people who needed it. She was still walking forward. One step at a time. At exactly the speed she had.